All right, so as we continue on, I'm going to ask again, any questions on what we've done thus far? All right. Sometimes I think what happens when you take tests, and when I say this, I'm not saying, hey, it's you, Devin, it's you, Chris. No. But what happens with some people is they don't take a couple minutes at the beginning of the test to just lay out the way they want to do their programs. They just start typing. All right? And you get this mentality that whatever you started typing in to begin with is correct. Now, I'm going to tell you something that may or may not make sense to you right now, but ideally, you know, come May of 2020, you're all going to be graduating and you're all going to be going to jobs in IT. All right? And what you are given on the test are requirements. The requirements should always be what drives what you do. All right? Let's assume that Chris graduates and he's going to become a contractor. So he hangs out his own shingle and, you know, he basically contracts out work. He may occasionally be given a job where he thinks to himself, he starts laughing and he thinks, this is idiotic. If he wants to keep the contract, he probably doesn't call the people up and say, you know, this is idiotic. But he might look at it and say, wow, they really should have accounted for this and they should have accounted for this. He's got two choices then if he signed a contract. If he calls them up and he says, hey, did you also want me to do this, this, this? What are they going to say? Yep. Of course we do. Now he's doing those things for free. So that's his decision as to whether or not he tells them, or he waits and when he gets done and they say, hey, can you also come back and do this, this, this? And Chris says, sure I can. But I think we should write another contract then. All right, because I've had this happen before where I've had students go to work for somebody in an internship type of level and they agree on everything. And then they're like, okay, and I'll agree, you'll tell me when it's done. And then you say when it's done, and then they go, oh, I forgot to tell you I also wanted this. Oh, I forgot to tell you I also wanted this. And the worst occurrence of that I ever had was when I had a student who was doing a website for a senior citizen center. And he was working with all seniors. I know that because when he went to the meetings, I went with him. And they never stopped with what they wanted. Finally, at the end, he said, okay, I'll do anything you want, but you give me a list. This is it. So they gave him a list. He did everything. He brought it in and he showed it to him. Oh, you know what? If you could just tweak this color and this. He told me, he said, no. They were peeved at it. Well, you've done it. No, because we agreed before these would be the final requirements. Now, I'm doing this for free. He was. Because at the school I used to work at, you had to do an internship. It could be paid. It didn't have to be paid. But he told them, I will do it for you, but then we have to write up a contract, and I'm going to get paid for it. They didn't like that. He said, okay. He said, I'm not offended. I'm just not doing it anymore. All right. So we've come in here, and now I put a couple comments in there. We set up the variables that represent our input text boxes and the ones representing our output disabled text boxes. So now we have to validate the three inputs that we have. So we have to validate the miles, we have to validate the gallons, we have to validate the price per gallon. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to write a comment that says validate miles input. All right. So if now when you look at this right here, this is what I just added. Does it make sense to you? I'm going to bring this back again. What we're saying is if either what was in there was non-numeric or what was in there was less than, I think we said 1 was the minimum miles, or what was in there is greater than 1,000. So what we're doing right here when we're validating is we're checking for bad input. Does that make sense? So let's assume that I put in here 2000000. All right, about 2 million or 20 million. I didn't count the zeros. But it's out of whack. Would you agree with that? All right. Well, what I decided was if that's the case, what did I want to do? All right, so I came in here and I put in 2 million. Well, first I want this to change and I want it to say invalid / out of range input. That's the first thing I wanted to have happen. All right, so I wanted to let the user know that what they put in there was bad. Next, I wanted to just remove everything that was in there. I don't want anything to be in there. All right, next, okay, after I remove that and I don't want there to be anything in there, I want the focus or my cursor to go back in here so I can put something valid in. Those are 3 things. The other thing is, would you agree I now know that my input was invalid? Would you agree with that? I put in something invalid. So I want to take that flag that I have that's called valid input, which was true, and I want to set it to false. All right? So it's 4 lines of code that I want to do in here. Okay. Now you look at that, and that might look a little weird. You're setting it equal to bad? What's bad? We set that up here, remember? Okay? So that will make sure that that's going to replace that asterisk that is there with the words invalid / out of range input. All right? So that's what that line right there is doing. So that's the first thing that we want to do. Okay? The next thing that we want to do is we want to come back to here. Okay? And we want to take what was in there and set it equal to nothing. I want to remove that because it was a bad value. And I want to put the focus right there. Finally, I want to set my valid input to false. Now, look at that if you would, please. This is saying these are the occasions where we have put something we should not have put into that field right there. So if we either left it blank, or we put something in there that was non-numeric, or we put something in there that was negative, 0 or negative, or that was greater than 1,000. What do? Well, this line right here, line 32, says change that asterisk so that it now says invalid / out of range input. All right, so that's the first thing that's going to do. The next thing is I'm going to blank out the value that was in there by setting the value. Oh, please look on the screen. There's a mistake. That's equals, and somehow I left the equal sign out of there. All right. So that will put nothing in there, but I want the cursor to be there so I can put in a new value. So that's setting the focus. Now, since I have an error message there, I know that my input wasn't valid, so I'm setting my valid input equal to false. Now, if you say, yeah, I get that, that's good, because we do the exact same thing for these 2 fields. So the only thing that's going to change is instead of miles, that's going to say gallons. Instead of miles, that's going to say ppg. Instead of min miles, it'll be min gals or max gals, or it'll be min ppg or max ppg. Does that make sense? We are doing the exact same thing. All right? Now, I could just copy but I'm going to go and key it in. So the first one was miles, the second one is gallons. Oops, don't know what I did there. All right. Now, when you look at this and you look at these two, again, they're virtually the same thing, but they're testing two different fields. In the first case, we were testing what goes into this one. In the second case, we're testing what goes into that one. Now, sometimes students will ask a question. Well, it's already valid input there. Why are you doing it again? Because it may not be valid input. It's possible that the input in none of those three text boxes, none of it is good, or none of it is bad, or some of it is good, and some of it is bad. All right? So now, suppose I should copy that comment there. And now instead of miles, it'll be gallons. All right, and I am going to just copy this last one. And the last one is price per gallon. And that was PPG. One sec. All right, go ahead. All right, I missed a dollar sign on that focus, and I missed a dollar sign on that focus. That's on the first one. Thank you. So now I should have validated all three of my input fields. Would you all agree, looking at this, that either these are all valid, all right, or 1, 2, or all three are invalid? Would you agree with that? And if 1, 2, or 3 are invalid, I have changed what's over there. Okay? So right now, when I get down to this line of code right here that I haven't written yet, but if I get down there to line 55, either my valid input flag is true, meaning that all three fields validated cleanly, or it's false, meaning that either 1 or 2 or all three didn't validate. Does that make sense? Yes.
On line 30, the miles are looking like
Line 30. You're right. Where? Here? No, it doesn't need it there. This is that. That's that one. The only time I need this, the only time I need the dollar sign and the double quotes is when I'm actually referring to something that's on the form, something with an ID. Here, though, now I'm referring to, I've already grabbed that value and put it in a variable. So these are the variables that we're working with here. And you're right, so that's a mistake. That shouldn't have been there. And that shouldn't have been there. All right. Thank you for pointing that out. You were right, kind of in reverse, but you were right. All right. So that should not be in double quotes. That should not be in double quotes. So the only time I'm going to refer to something in here in double quotes is when I'm referring to what it is on the form. All right, so I get down to here. So what I have to do now is check the valid input flag. If true, go on. So in other words, if valid input is true, then I want to continue on. All right? So if it's true, remember to say if valid input, remember that is a shortcut. That's the same thing as if valid input equal true. Those two are the same thing. If it makes more sense to you right now to be putting it in this way, by all means, write it that way. All right. The good news is it works like that for virtually every programming language, at least for every one that we work on in the program here. All right. So if it was valid, well, what can I do? Well, now I know I can calculate my MPG, and that's going to need what? It's going to need the miles that I drove and the gallons that I used. Now, I didn't write this yet. This is not yet written. So if you try to run the program after that, you're going to get an error message. All right? That's the first thing I can do. All right? Well, what's left? Well, after we do that, we also want to calculate the cost of our trip. And so how did I know that that was miles and gallons? I went back and looked on here, and remember what you were given here were the formulas that you should use. So MPG needs miles driven and gallons used, miles and gallons. Trip cost needs gallons used and price per gallon. So it needs gallons and it needs PPG. All right. Now we have a problem here. Please listen to me. The way this code is currently written, we have a problem. Oops, sorry. And what that problem is we have one more field, cost per mile. And that needs miles driven, miles which we have, and trip cost, which we don't have yet. All right? So I'm not going to have this routine. Please listen to what I'm saying. This routine that I'm in right now, this main, this is not going to calculate the trip cost. I'm going to have this routine when it's all done. Say this again. This is going to calculate the miles per gallon. This is going to calculate the trip cost. What's left to do in there is to calculate the per mile cost. All right? I'm not going to call that from here. I'm going to have trip cost. This routine is going to call another routine. All right? If you don't get that, hopefully at least, you will in just a couple minutes when we finish this all up. Now, in order to be able to do that, it's going to need the miles. All right, yes?
If we can just use ifs for everything, what's the point of using else and else if?
If you've got an if with an else, let's just look at a real simple example, the one that we've been working on, okay? So if you say var x equals 37, var result equals x modulo 2. We talked about this before. You know, if you take 37 and you modulo it by 2, you get 18, but you get a remainder of 1. So we talked before and we said if res equal 1, then we can just do an alert that says odd. Else, we could do an alert that says even. I'm not worrying about 0 right now. So I think what you're asking is, why couldn't we just have done this as 2 ifs? The answer is, you could have. Okay? But the system, since this is looked at as one big expression, says, was it 1? No. So it does this. It does it much faster. When you do a succession of ifs like that, it's got to check everything. Even if it already found it here, it's still going to have to check it here because it's another if. All right? And I want you to understand, if you look on the screen here, because it looks a little weird, trip cost, this routine right here, calculate trip cost, this does not need miles. So why am I passing it miles? Because calculate trip cost is going to call calculate per mile, and per mile needs miles. So I am passing it through the pipeline, so to speak. All right? So I've done those 2 things. And now, well, would you agree? I know I'm asking you this question. If I get to this point, true or false? I know now. Where are we? Come on. There we go. If valid input is true, everything I put in here was true. Is that correct? Or is that not correct? If valid input is true, these were all valid values. Is that true? Okay. So the other thing I can do now is I can get rid of these asterisks. I don't need them. All right? So how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to just come in here and kind of cheat a little bit here. And say my miles, this is equal to nothing. And then my gallons is equal to nothing. And then finally, my price per gallon is equal to nothing. Okay? What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep my interface as clean as I can possibly make it. Does that make sense? All right. So now I'm done with this routine, except here's the hardest question you've ever had in this class. If it's not true, if valid input is not true, what is it? It's false. All right. So if it is false, and this is going to go back to Chris, before when you asked that, or I think, Kristen, you asked that, why did you call that, somebody said, why didn't you just put all that code in there, as opposed to putting it into 2 routines? Well, else, now what I want to call here is not clear all, I want to call it clear, no, it's blank out, I guess it was, blank out all fields. Because if it was invalid, what this will do, just so you know, what this will do is if I hit the else, all right, if I hit the else, then I know that valid input was equal to false. All right, I know that. So I want to blank out all fields. What is blank out all fields going to do? It's going to blank out these 3 things and these 3 things, but it's going to leave the error messages in there. If I don't do that, if I just make it go to asterisk, you don't know what the error was. So you've done something bad, but you don't know what you did that was bad. All right? And now you will. So now I've got to write these 3 routines. All right. The first one is simply calculate MPG. And to do that, whoops, try that again. It's equal to function. Oh, that's not good. All right. But that function is going to need what? It's going to need the miles, and it's going to need the gallons. All right. Now this becomes a pretty simple function. Why? Because it's just a return statement. And in fact, I can make it a return statement. So I could say this. I could say return miles divided by gallons, but I already know where this is going. So I can say MPG dot value is equal to miles divided by gallons dot to fixed 2. That's about as clean, clear, and crisp of a function as I can write. Yes.
Do we need the dollar sign for the?
Yes, we do. Thank you. Question was, did we need the dollar sign before that? The answer is yeah, but I foolishly forgot it. So yes, there should be a dollar sign there. Thank you. So what this line of code right here, line 72, what that line of code is saying is, all right, we want MPG, which is what we're going to put here, we want that to be equal to this divided by this, and then put it to 2 decimal places. All right? So that's the first one. So now, all right, so now we can do the second one. And what do we need? What do we need for trip cost? I don't remember these things. So I'm going back to the test, and I'm going to look over here, what was my formula for trip cost? It said I needed gallons, and I needed price per gallon. Yes?
For your variable, you put an L instead of an I?
Thank you. There we go. Thank you. So I need gallons, and I need price per gallon. So I will need gallons, and I will need my price per gallon. Here's a question for you. Okay? Do I have to call them gallons and ppg? Could I call them just G and P? Yes or no, and why? You're shaking your head yes, Luke. You're correct. Why?
Because you're calling the.
You're making it too hard.
You want the actual value.
Yes, because these are formal parameters. When we called it up above, they were actual parameters. So we had to use their names. Now we can call them anything we want. I'm just choosing to use the same name, even though we did not have to do that. So for calculating the trip cost, now this is where it got a little funky because I wanted the dollar sign in there. And it didn't like it with some of the stuff that I was doing. So I actually ended up here writing 4 lines of code where I probably could have done it in 3. So I did put an extra line of code in there. All right? If you say I don't know what you mean, well then just watch what I do. And then hopefully it'll make some sense. So var TC, that's trip cost, equals, all right, and what is the formula again? It is gallons used times price per gallon. So it's gallons times price per gallon. And again, I want that dot to fixed, and I want that to 2 decimal places. All right? Now that I've done that, I could go and I could put this, I could take this right here and I could go and put it inside of, I could put it in here. Would you agree with that? I could do that. The problem is I want there to be a dollar sign there. So I created another variable just so there'd be no problem. And I just called it F. I don't even know why, but I called it F. And I said F was equal to TC, which is what we had right there. I'm sorry, a dollar sign plus TC. So instead of that saying like 0.12, it'll be dollar sign 0.12. Now, don't look, but please listen to this. JavaScript is not as complete a language as some other languages are. Next semester, when we are doing C#, you will put a thing on there that says, for example, you'll put C in double quotes. That'll mean formatted as currency. Put commas in if I need them, put a decimal place in there, do it to 2 decimal places, put a dollar sign in there. JavaScript doesn't have that capability. All right, unless you give it to it by programming. That's kind of what I'm doing now. All right, then one more line of code. Now I can calculate my per mile cost. And to do that, it will need my trip cost and it will need my miles driven. That's the end of this one. All right, about 3 more lines and we're finished.
What does F and M stand for?
Nothing. Well, the M actually stands for miles. Okay, and I'm glad you said that because that, please look up on the screen here. We had to pass that in too. There should be an M in there. That was my error. All right. So thanks for seeing that. And this will be var PM per mile, and that's equal to what? Again, I don't remember what that is, so I go back to the requirements and I check. My cost per mile is my trip cost divided by my miles driven. So that's equal to what? Trip cost divided by miles driven dot 2 fixed to 2 decimal places. All right. And now that I've got that, now I can say dollar sign per mile dot value equals my dollar sign plus okay, I'm left off a line. We'll have to go back to that in a minute. So that's going to be equal to my dollar sign plus my per mile that we just did. All right. One more line because I left one out. I apologize. That's up here. Go back to the previous function here. Okay. And we have to add a line right here. And that will be trip cost dot value equals dollar sign plus, actually it just equals F. Okay. Now, I have broken a bunch of rules that I told you about earlier. The biggest rule that I have broken is I said write a little code, run it and test it, write a little more code, run it and test it. And I put everything in here. Why? I don't know why. Everything is plugged in, but it's telling me that I'm just about, yeah, whatever. It's telling me I'm just about out of battery. That's not good news. All right. So I'm going to save it now, and I'm going to go back to my miles per gallon here, and I'm going to try to run it. right, so there's a trip cost. Okay, well, you can already tell there's a problem. So what do I do? Somebody tell me, what do I do? By hitting, well, I hit F12, but you can try that one. All right, so it's saying that on line 20, I'm missing a parenthesis. So I go back to line 20. All right. Notice I've got 2 left, and how many right do I have? 1. So as far as I can tell, those are all wrong. So I need a paren here, and I need a paren here, and I need a paren there. All right, I didn't add those. Please make sure you do. I'm going to save that. I'm going to come back and try to run it again. Still doesn't like something. So I hit F12 again. Now it says unexpected token on line 31. All right. So I go to line 31. Doesn't like that. So we look over here. Look on the screen. See this? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've got 1, 2, well, that looks like 4, but for some reason, these aren't mapping up. So let's see if we can make them map up. Pardon? Yeah, it's this one right here. Should be over here, I believe. And now I won't need that one. Let's see. Well, let's look here. Those 2 are together. Those 2 are together. Those 2 are together. Those 2 are together. And I do need one more on the end. All right. It's funny. When I was in your situation, I had a teacher that referred to me as the parenthesis fairy, literally, which I didn't really appreciate. But the reason that he said that was he said, you know, technically you could get through this whole thing and just put a paren here and a paren there, and the system can figure out the rest. And I said, I'm not giving the system that capability. I'm taking control and I'm telling it to do this, or to do this, or to do this. I'm telling it that that's what I want it to do. All right? So since that one's wrong, there's probably a pretty good chance these other ones at least could be wrong. So 2 and 2. All right, 1 and 2. Looks like that one will be okay. And then the one here will also need 2. All right. So, again, if I had been writing a little code, then testing it, writing a little code and testing it, I would have found those errors earlier. All right, so that's on me for not doing it the right way. So let's run it again. Still doesn't like it. So now it's saying cannot set property node value of null in line 32. And I think that one, mine is actually right, but we're going to find out in just a second. Because it's not next sibling, it's next element sibling. Now, why did I...
Sir, can you please remind me which homework was due today and which was
Yeah,
one
we
Friday?
will talk about that. Please remind me at the end of class, and I will tell you exactly, okay?
Thanks.